so let's begin. I hope everyone's well, keeping safe. Welcome to this second in a series of webinars presented by Beyond Curated. We specialize in curating private heritage and cultural experiences with a focus on British heritage. And of course, James Bond ties in beautifully with all of that. And today we're focusing on some of the more notable qualities of Bond, being, of course, his resilience, his adaptability. I think at this time, those are qualities that we can certainly all learn from and reach into within ourselves. Of course, at Beyond Curated, we're incredibly passionate about British heritage and culture, and we want to bring you this virtual experience today to invite you into our world and to get a taste of some of the insights that we can offer as part of our experiences. So without further ado, I'd like to commence and welcome our first speaker today, James Nicholls. I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, my name's James Nicholls. I'm an Anglo-Italian based in Sydney, Australia, so it's getting near bedtime. And for the watch aficionados out there, see by the end of this if you can work out which film this watch was from. But it did come in disguise, as so many things in James Bond did. I spend my time, I'm a writer, a broadcaster, a lecturer, and a classic car specialist. I spend a lot of my time going to concours events. But I suppose, like anybody aged from 9 to 93, and being English originally, I'm totally infatuated by James Bond because he represents so much of all those wonderful things that Linda just described: resilience, inner strength. That he's a bit like the most famous car of all time, really. I suppose he's a bit like his Aston Martin DB5. You know, he's this true British gentleman dressed in an Italian suit, because the Aston Martin DB5 is a quintessentially British car, but with bodywork by Touring Superleggera. But we'll come on to that a little bit more. And I know one of my fellow speakers has also brought along his DB5 for reference. But of course, in the books, and I think there's quite an interesting parallel universe between the books and the films. And I suppose because Fleming died in 1967, I think it was, we ran out of those great books. And although there have been several follow-on books by Sebastian Faulks, by Gardner, none of them capture Bond in the way that his creator did. And there's no doubt about it. I mean, Fleming was an inordinately talented writer, in that he was recognized by Julian Simons, John Betjeman, the poet laureate, Raymond Chandler, the great noir writer from America, who of course was himself English originally. He was recognized by his peers at the time as being a very, very substantial writer, and certainly a cut above many of his peers. So I think there's, the books, unfortunately for us, finish too early. And there also seems to be a slightly parallel universe. And I suppose the younger ones amongst us think more of the films than of the books. And of course, the films turn us back to the books, and the books turn us towards the films. I think Bond is one of the great transmedia figures of all time. The only other person, or the other sort of franchise, if you like, that I think transcends all forms of media so much is perhaps the Star Wars episodes. But for me, I suppose Bond began back in the 60s with seeing cards like these. Of course, everything in reverse on the camera, bubblegum chewing cards. And I seem to remember as a young boy of about 10 or 12 having a collection of these. And I think from my memory, because it was such a long time ago, serves me well, some of them were a little bit risque. And of course, the films tend to be more risque and a bit more fast moving than the books. And if we think of, you know, I'm a car specialist, so I'm going to talk about cars. If we think about James Bond and his Aston Martin, if we go back right to the beginning and the books in 1953, we first see Bond not driving an Aston Martin at all, but originally a Bentley 4.5 litre. And at the time, this car was 20 years old. The first book was written in 1953. And the car that Bond drives is a 1933 car. And he introduces it quite early on in about chapter 5, but they're short chapters, remember, in Casino Royale, the first of the books. And I'll just quote you a little bit from this, if I may. Bond's car was his only personal hobby. One of the last 4.5 litre Bentleys with the supercharger by Amherst Villiers. He had bought it almost new in 1933 and had kept it in careful storage through the war. It was still serviced every year, and in London, a former Bentley mechanic who worked in a garage near Bond's Chelsea flat tended it with jealous care. Bond drove it hard and well, and with an almost sensual pleasure. It was battleship grey convertible coupe, which really did convert, and it was capable of touring at 90 with 30 miles an hour in reserve. Bond eased the car out of the garage and up the ramp, and soon the loitering drumbeat of the 2-inch exhaust was echoing down the tree-lined boulevard, through the crowded main street of the little town, and off through the sand dunes to the south. And this almost sensual pleasure which he drives his car, he talks about the car going through just in Casino Royale. The car was waiting for him outside. A bit later on, he talks about it as though it's an animal. He whips the car and he treats it like an animal. As he drove, whipping the car faster and faster through the night, the other half of his mind, he cursed Vesper and M for having sent her on the job. And he treats the car and his women virtually the same. They're animals to be used, to be driven as hard and as fast as one can. It reminds me of that poem by E.E. Cummings, She Being Brand New and Consequently a Little Stiff, which I don't think was about a motor car at all. As Bond hurtled round the bend, caressing the great car against the camber with an easy sway of body and hands, he was working out his plan of action, blah, blah, blah. It's all sensual, the way he treats the car and the way he treats his women. So that's him in a big, heavy car, a Bentley 4.5 litre. And we don't see the Aston Martin DB5. In fact, it was actually, for the Conoscenti, it was actually an Aston Martin DB4 Vantage. And the only way you can tell the difference is around the headlights, this little bit here. The screw fixings are slightly different on an Aston Martin DB4 Vantage than they are on an Aston Martin DB5. So even though BMT 216A, I think it is the most famous car in the world and recognized the world over as an Aston Martin DB5, it's actually a DB4 Vantage, but you can't tell the difference. So we don't see the Aston Martin until the third film, Goldfinger, in 1964. In Dr. No, the first film, he drives a Sunbeam Alpine. But of course, the book was written quite a bit earlier. The book was written in 58, and the film of Dr. No was 62. And in 1958, the Sunbeam Alpine, he drives a Sunbeam Alpine in the book and a Sunbeam Alpine in the film. In 1958, the Sunbeam Alpine that he would driven would have been the same sort of car driven by Grace Kelly and in To Catch a Thief with Cary Grant. But by the time the film comes out, the Sunbeam Alpine has been upgraded and it's now a nippy little sports car. So the Bentley 4.5 litre goes through various iterations. He then drives a Bentley Mark VI and ultimately a Bentley Continental, the same as Fleming himself drove until the end of his life in 1964. In the second film, From Russia with Love, we see Bond with a Bentley in the same, and that's in the 1963 film, and the same as the 1957 book. But it's quite interesting because in the books, the cars are already quite old, but in the films, they're bang up to date, and as is Bond, all of his gadgetry. But in 64 with Goldfinger, and in 65 in Thunderball, and that's where the watch is from, by the way. In 65 in Thunderball, we see the Aston Martin come into its own, and those fantastic images of Sean Connery. Again, for somebody my age, the definitive Bond, I suppose, but I do rather like all of them in their own sweet way. I think the latest one's pretty good, even though he's soon to be gone. We see the Aston Martin truly come into form. That's in 1964. Interestingly enough, Fleming also wrote a sort of James Bond for kids. So I'm sure we all know Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Here, there, in a motor car. Oh, what a happy time we spend. Fleming wrote that book in 1964 for his nephew Caspar, who'd been sick, and so he came up with this beautiful story about the flying car, which was in fact based upon a real racing car from the 1920s, driven by Count somebody or other, and it was rather an amazing machine. In the original first edition cover of Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the car is very much like a Bentley 4.5 litre, as Bond originally drove. And of course, Caractacus Potts, the protagonist, inventor in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, is also a commander, the same rank as James Bond, and of course the same rank as Fleming himself. And it's quite interesting, this idea of this crossover of cars and people. John Steed in The Avengers at around the same time is driving a Bentley 4.5 litre. And of course, his partner in crime is Diana Rigg, who drove the lovely Lotus Elan. And Diana Rigg, yes.
Hi, sorry, just to interject briefly, I just want to let
have I been on mute? Have I been on mute all the time?
No, not at all. I'd just like to let all our guests know that they're very welcome to pop any questions into the chat. Please do send them through. We'd love to try and get to as many questions as we possibly can. So let's keep this quite interactive. Pop your questions into the chat. Yeah, fire away. Amazing. Thank you, James. Please carry on.
I've lost it completely now. Train of thought's gone. Where was I up to? I was up to Diana Rigg. Diana Rigg, who was also appeared in James Bond film, and this time with George Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service in 1969. And by now, Bond has upgraded from the DB5, slipped straight past the DB6, and is driving an Aston Martin DBS Vantage, which of course, again, is a car that, before I go on, I was just thinking about Diana Rigg, and we should all take a moment to pause and think about Honor Blackman, who was one of the great Bond girls and who passed away earlier this month, aged 94. And whilst researching my facts and figures for this talk, I came across that fantastic photograph by Terry O'Neill as she's standing on the beach looking up at the camera with "Pussy" written in the sand. Absolutely wonderful image, and what a pity to lose such a glorious lady. But 94, she didn't do too bad. But back to Diana Rigg, the only time that Bond gets married, he marries Tracy in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and of course it's the only time that we see George Lazenby, a fantastic portrayal of Bond in that film. He's driving an Aston Martin DBS Vantage, and of course that's the same car, or the same model of car, driven by Roger Moore in The Persuaders. And I'm not sure, oh yes, I can see Alessandra's here. Those of you in Italy who don't know The Persuaders, it was known in Italy as I tenti, I quei due, look out for these two. And so Roger Moore drove an Aston Martin DBS Vantage in The Persuaders along with Tony Curtis in his Ferrari Dino. And it was Moore, of course, who became the next Bond after George Lazenby. And again, these things go round a little bit in circles, because Diana Rigg drove a Lotus Elan. In Moore's first film, The Spy Who Loved Me in 1977, he's driving a Lotus Esprit. And we all remember that fantastic scene where it comes up, where it converts into a submarine and comes up out of the water onto the beach in Sardinia. Absolutely beautiful. And Bond Moore also drove a Lotus Esprit, a bit of an upgraded one this time, and a Lotus Esprit Turbo in the 1981 film For Your Eyes Only. Then we go into a bit of a mishmash because Bond certainly loses the plot in the films with some of the cars he's driving. In the books, we stay much closer to the truth. But Timothy Dalton, in License to Kill in 1989, drives, I think Dalton is the completely, he's a bit like Name the Magnificent Seven. Nobody can ever remember the seventh one. Timothy Dalton is the last one that you remember as James Bond. He was a totally forgettable Bond, in my opinion, in License to Kill, and he drove a totally forgettable motor car, a Maserati Biturbo, and I must admit, a Maserati Biturbo. Even I owned one of those, so they can't be that classy. It is the entry level bottom feeder of Maseratis. But thankfully, after Timothy Dalton, the DB5 gets a reprise, and we tend to forget about this one a little bit. Oh, hang on a minute, somebody's just passed me. Excuse me a second.
Cheers. Cheers, James.
Richard, you'll be able to tell us later on what that's all about, what's in that glass, I hope.
Shaken, not stirred, I take it.
Sure.
Shaken, of course. The DB5 gets a bit of a reprise with Pierce Brosnan, and I quite like Brosnan as Bond after the sort of lightheartedness of the Bond films. Though I did watch Octopussy again the other night, and having just returned from Delhi, I was surprised at how sort of faithful that jokey Octopussy film was to much of the Indian way of life, even down to the professional tennis player, one of the Amracharge brothers. But so in 1995, the DB5 comes back with Pierce Brosnan, and in the film, and we see in GoldenEye him drive that. But he goes through a horrible period of lots of BMWs around this time, and it's not nice. I've written a note there, and I can't read it. It says something about product placement. And of course, the great thing about the Aston Martin was the films originally were in need of the car, and it was sort of lent. It wasn't a product placement in the same way that the BMWs certainly were of the late 20th century. And then, of course, being very, very clever, and now we are talking about product placement, the modern raft of Bond films, Casino Royale. Oh, and who remembers the 1967 Casino Royale, the sort of odd man out film? Or there are two of those, because there was also that terrible one when Sean Connery came back as an old man. His hair was a bit like mine. He must have been going through a pandemic, so he couldn't get out to the barbers, because he had a shocking haircut. But David Niven in the original Casino Royale of 1967, it was a complete spoof, a send-up, but true to form, David Niven, as in Casino Royale, did drive a Bentley 4.5 litre, so they did get one fact right then. But Casino Royale remade in 2006, Skyfall in 2012, and of course Skyfall, the car is is a protagonist in that film, and then of course Spectre. In 2015, we see the DB5. I'm just going to go very quickly to share a screen. We're going to see the DB5 again in the next film, No Time to Die, which I now believe has been postponed until October because of the pandemic. But I just want to show you this one slide. I'll just go to my share screen. So forgive me, host.
And James, can I ask you a quick question as well? Have you ever actually driven a DB5? What does it feel like? It must
I have
be an
driven
incredible experience.
Fantastic. And of course, my DB5 here is gold. And when we come to Claude, he'll have the correct color. You must, if you're going to drive a DB5, you must drive one that's in silver birch with black interior. And I've been fortunate enough to drive, due to my work and hobbies and interest in cars, lots and lots of cars, and I have been fortunate enough to drive a DB5. They're unbelievably good, quite heavy, and quite heavy on the clutch, and not really for driving around, where Bond lived in Chelsea, particularly adept, certainly in 2020, perhaps in the 1960s maybe, but quite heavy and heavy on the steering and heavy, but they're a GT. And a grand tourer, and for wonderful to drive on the open road, very, very powerful, very responsive, just absolutely beautiful. And of course, if we have this Bond passion, if you're sitting in a DB5, silver birch with black leather interior, and the guy whose car I was driving had even got a fake gear knob with an ejector button. It didn't actually eject anybody, but he even had the button that you could do. It was just wonderful, and an amazing motor car, and certainly an iconic car, as is now reflected in the price. But I don't know. Have you locked my? Can I share my screen, or have you locked that?
No, that's fine. We're just kind of running out of time, and may have to move on to our next speaker. I mean, we can talk about this forever, and it's such an amazing subject.
You had enough of me, fair enough.
Totally, James. No, thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing, really, really insightful, hugely inspiring. And as I said, Bond is such an incredible subject. We can all talk about him for absolute ages. But thank you very much, James. Cheers, enjoy. So please, as I said earlier, guys, feel free to pop your questions into the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we possibly can. And for those of you who might have joined a little bit later, welcome. I hope you're all doing very well and staying safe. My name is Linda Hugo. I'm the founder and director of Beyond Curated. Private cultural and heritage British experiences is what we specialize in. So today's webinar is bringing you a little bit of a taste of what we can offer, the insights, the masterclasses, private dining, our passion for the finer things in life, which very much relates to Bond as well. So welcome everybody. We're going to move on now to our second speaker, Claude. Hi, Claude. I'll let you introduce yourself, and we look forward to hearing from you. Are you there? Hi.
Well, thank you very much.
Fabulous in your dicky.
Or should I say thank you, thank you, Moneypenny. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my own interest in Bond, and in particular his connections, and also Ian Fleming's connections to the art world in which I work. I run the 19th century European paintings department at Sotheby's in London. I've been working there for 20 years plus, and during that time, as I hope to explain, some interesting connections between Bond and the art world have come to light. But before I go on, I just wanted to pick up on James's point, so we're going slightly in reverse order, to talk about the DB5 once more. This is the silver version, by the way, with the custom-built, custom-made retractable roof for kicking out anyone that you don't want in the passenger seat. And to say that Sotheby's, as you know, also sells cars in association with RM Auctions. And in 2010, we sold one of these DB5s in London at Battersea for nigh on £3 million. And it was actually a car used in the filming of Goldfinger in 1964. So that was a then record, I think, for a Bond car. And then only last year, again at RM, this time in Monterey in California, we sold another DB5. This was one that was used as a promotional vehicle for the Thunderball movie in 1967. And that one fetched a lot more, I think $19 million. So how about that? Pretty impressive prices that these cars fetch. And they say cars are a wasting asset. So I would take issue with that. Anyway, back to what I've come to talk to you about, and of course I am of course a self-avowed Bond fan. I grew up as a teenager with the Roger Moore films in the late 70s and the 80s, and I have to confess he's my favorite Bond. Many of you will beg to differ, I'm sure. And I really came to Bond through the films, but as James rightly said, the films introduce you to the books and vice versa. For me, it was the films that introduced me to the books, which I also read hungrily as a teenager. And I've always admired this figure of Bond, you know, such a well-traveled man with refined tastes. And I think that it was, in a way, watching the films, and Octopussy in particular, that might just have helped me get started on my career as an art expert, more of which shortly. But it was all the places that he visited and the interesting larger-than-life characters he met, of which I also meet a fair share, and most colleagues in my business do, that sort of got me interested in the whole international art market. And of course, many of the films, particularly in the Moore era and going back before that, were beautifully set with wonderful, albeit replica works of art central to the plots, which I also found fascinating. So as I worked at Sotheby's, I realized that there were more connections between Bond and Fleming and the art world than first meet the eye. And let's just start with his name, James Bond. I mean, Bond lore would tell you that the character was named after a certain James Bond, the author of Birds of the West Indies, a copy of which Fleming had on his shelf in his study at Goldeneye in Jamaica. And this may or may not be the inspiration for the name, but I have unearthed some other clues and information which I think are quite interesting to take into consideration. As many of you may know, Fleming and Sotheby's long-serving and very flamboyant managing director in the 50s, Peter Wilson, served together in naval intelligence during the Second World War. And Peter's operative number, so I have read, was in fact 007, which raises the question whether James Bond wasn't in fact named after Peter, or at least after his place of work in Bond Street. So I'll leave that question for you to ponder, but I think it's quite an interesting one. After the war, Fleming and his wife, Anne, moved in London's artistic circles and counted the society portraitist Cecil Beaton among their friends. Now, here next to me is in fact a portrait of Ian Fleming taken by Cecil Beaton in the 1950s. And you're probably wondering how I came by this print. Well, it just so happens that Sotheby's owns the Cecil Beaton archive, which is an incredible resource, by the way, of the who's who of the 50s and 60s. Cecil Beaton, as I say, photographed Fleming many times, as well as his family, both in London on his own, but also at Goldeneye in Jamaica. Another friend was Lucien Freud, the late Lucien Freud, who died not so long ago, the painter, who painted Anne Fleming's portrait in oil. Also in the Fleming's circle was the illustrator Richard Chopping, now whom Fleming commissioned to conceive and design the now famous covers for the first editions, of which this is one of my prized first edition copies. In fact, it's the covers that make these books very valuable now. Our books department sells first editions quite regularly. I think the current record for a first edition Bond stands at about $85,000, which is quite a phenomenal amount of money. And what made that particular copy of Casino Royale stand out was that it was inscribed and dedicated by Ian Fleming to none other than Raymond Chandler. So I think that provenance also contributed to that price. But suffice it to say that these books, these first editions, and the covers in particular, are really coveted among collectors today.
Claude, sorry, can I interrupt? Just interestingly enough, just talking about Chopping, I understand that Chopping had his studio above Francis Bacon's studio, and that's how Bond, Mrs. Fleming went along to the Bacon exhibition and met Chopping, and that's how the link came about.
Well, that's fascinating because, of course, Bacon and Lucian Freud were also thick as thieves and frequented the Dean Street Club together and in Soho, and yeah, it's a small world, fascinating one. The Flemings also became close friends with Sir Isaiah and Lady Aline Berlin. Now, Aline's son from her previous marriage was Michel Strauss, who went on to have a very long and distinguished career at Sotheby's. In fact, he only retired about 10 years ago. And, you know, it was Michel, who set up our Impressionist and Modern Art department back in the 60s, and which is now one of our highest grossing pictures departments. In any case, as a young man in his 20s, Michel plucked up the courage to ask his parents' friend, Ian Fleming, whether he wouldn't contribute a short story to Sotheby's yearbook, The Ivory Hammer, for the 1964 edition, in fact. And to Michel's delight, Fleming obliged. We, Sotheby's, did offer Fleming a fee, a writer's fee for doing this, which he in fact turned down. But the story, which was entitled The Property of a Lady, about an auction of a Fabergé egg at Sotheby's, went on to be published as a short story and has become, and also, of course, went on to inspire the movie Octopussy, more of which I will tell you about in a minute. But the Property of a Lady is a really wonderful little short story, which I can only recommend. I mean, it was written to fit into, as I say, a Sotheby's yearbook. It's only about 10 pages long, but it's a wonderfully evocative story about the art world or the auction business in the mid-60s, and it names many figures by name who actually star in the book, including, well, Pete Wilson, of course, our head auctioneer, but also the late Sir Kenneth Snowman, the then director of Wartski's Jewelers to the Queen, who helps Bond authenticate this Fabergé egg. So, as I say, the story was a success. Not only was it published by Jonathan Cape in 1964, it also went on to inspire the film Octopussy, which was made in 1983, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that film. Confusingly, Octopussy is the title of another Ian Fleming short story, but the producers chose Property of a Lady as the script for Octopussy. If that makes sense. It's slightly confusing. Another Sotheby's connection came much later. Oh, just before I come on to this, just apropos Fabergé eggs. So in this short story, the Fabergé egg, which is used to flush out a KGB agent, ends up going under the hammer for £150,000. It was a huge amount of money in 1964. But just to put that into context, some of you may have followed a sale that we held in 2004, or almost held in 2004, the Fabergé collection of Christopher Forbes. That was in 2004. And it was all slated to be a live auction in New York. I think there were a dozen Fabergé eggs in the collection. These were eggs that had found their way to the West under Soviet times as a way of raising, hard currency. But anyway, they were collected over the years by Forbes and were sold in 2004. On the eve of the auction, a Russian oligarch by the name of Viktor Vekselberg came forward and made a cash offer that we simply couldn't refuse on behalf of the seller. And he paid a reputed $100 million for the whole collection, lock, stock and barrel, which he has now turned into a museum in Russia, which I think is rather wonderful, considering that Russia didn't actually have a Fabergé museum up until that point. So therein lies another story.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Claude. I just want to let the audience know at this point as well, if you've got any questions at all, please pop them into the chat. We'll do our best to get round to them. Thank you so much. Claude, sorry, please carry on.
Just quickly finish up.
You've got a few more minutes.
Yeah, one more point. So another Sotheby's connection came much later, possibly again thanks to Michel Strauss's influence, when we were asked to sell the stock of Ken Paul, the antiques dealer come purveyor of props to the British film industry, whose Hampstead shop was a veritable emporium of curios, ranging from antiquities and sculpture to pictures and ship models. These appeared time and again in the Bond films, and as I said earlier, really lent those early films a rich patina, which made the films really fun for art lovers to watch. Anyway, the stock of his shop ended up being auctioned at Sotheby's in an auction. Excuse me, my son has just walked in. Were auctioned at Sotheby's in 2002 in a sale aptly called prop art. So, and to be honest with you, it was all sorts of rather miscellaneous odds and ends, reproduction, paintings, also furniture, sculpture, works of art. But they made a very prominent appearance in the films, as I say. And I have to say, ever since that sale took place, the Bond films, for me at least, haven't been quite the same, because they simply lack that that patina that they enjoyed at the time. So that's really all I wanted to say for now. But when you watch the films, do keep a lookout for all the pictures and the objects that feature, particularly in the Connery and Moore era. And yes, and enjoy. And,
thank you, Claude. That's amazing. We have one question here.
Yeah,
from Fraser Lockley. I read that Fleming was personally disappointed with the final Property of a Lady's Story.
yes.
Refused payment from Sotheby's. Is there truth to that?
Absolutely true. In fact, I was about to mention that. Yes, basically the story was published in our yearbook, as I say, but despite having been offered a fee, Fleming refused it because he himself wasn't satisfied with the story. It didn't, of course, stop Jonathan Cape from publishing it. And, you know, personally, I think it's a really wonderful, I would call it a vignette of the art world at that time. A really interesting little insight.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We've got one more question here. Any insight to the painting in Skyfall, the scene with a man
Yes.
shot. That's
Yes, the
from
Modigliani of the lady. Yes.
Yeah.
I have actually done a whole lecture on the art in the films, but I can't obviously those
Time.
But the Modigliani, yes, well, that's an interesting one because that year, the year that that film was made, the original of that painting actually was stolen from the Museum of Modern Art in Paris. And apparently, I don't think it was ever recovered, but it found its way to China, that much was known. And of course, that particular scene in Skyfall was filmed in a skyscraper in Shanghai. And so it was a nice little play on an earlier vignette in Dr. No in 1962, where Goya's portrait of Wellington, of the Duke of Wellington, makes an appearance in Dr. No's lair in Jamaica. And of course, this is a joke that is lost on modern audiences, but of course in 1962, that painting had been freshly stolen from the National Gallery in London. So in a way, the director of Skyfall was just taking a leaf out of Dr. No there, which I thought was rather a nice little detail.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Claude, so much. That was absolutely fascinating. And again, I think this is one of the most endearing qualities of Bond, of the novels and the movies, that they keep cross-referencing each other. And I mean, I certainly find I can watch the movies time and time again, and you keep finding more details and new little things that you missed before, and it just makes them sort of endearingly fascinating and timeless. So thank you so much, Claude, for that. That's amazing. Thank you. Right, we're going to move on to our final speaker, Richard Bagnold. Richard, hi, you there?
Hi, Linda. Yeah, can you hear me?
Hi, welcome. So Richard's going to be providing us with some amazing food and drink insights. Take it away, Richard. Again, audience, please feel free to pop your questions into the chat throughout. We'll get to as many as we can. Thank you. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Linda. Sure thing. Okay, so, well, hello, everyone. I'm Richard Bagnold. I founded a website called Major Foodie, which is an open restaurant review site. And the long story short is that took place after I ended up dining in and reviewing every Michelin-starred restaurants in the UK and various other 3-star places across the world. And I to the point where I now choose holidays based on where the best dining is. And I decided to do something with this, so I decided to create my own concierge service, which, very much in keeping with Linda's Beyond Curated, provides high-end days out to clients visiting London and the home counties, with an emphasis of always with a memorable meal, whether it's the best fish and chips or the finest dining Michelin-star restaurant, whatever it may be. I'll design, organise and host those for families with etiquette masterclasses and afternoon tea classes for those that need it, etc., etc. Anyway, that's just a little bit about me. In terms of the Bonds, the theme, well, obviously I'm a huge Bond fan myself, like James Claude and everyone on here. And I decided during my lockdown, Linda was aware that I jumped on the chance of this lockdown to read all of the original Fleming books, which I'm sure James and Claude have obviously done, and many of you have, but I never had, you see. So I've never actually read the books and gone back to the primary source. And I just need to make it clear that the food and wine that drinks that I'm talking about are just specifically from those 14 novels, the original Fleming novels, nothing else, not the films. Published between 53 and 66 by Ian Fleming. And that's because I wanted to go to the original creator of Bond, the person who actually thought of this person and invented this character, which is, by the by, an amalgam of Fleming himself and the various other officers he works with as a naval intelligence officer in the Royal Navy during the war. And whilst he didn't work directly with the Secret Service, he had his insights, their terminology, jargon, tactics, and methodologies is probably what makes those novels so believable and good. And it was great, as a former army officer myself for 20 years, it was great to have a look at that. So anyway, that's what I've taken them from. And I discovered that the books are just littered with food references. There are food similes and metaphors and descriptors in great detail over what not only Bond but other people had to eat. And there's essential food language running throughout the whole series of Fleming novels. So I'll draw out some of the things that stand out for me in terms of the food that Bond had, the drinks that Bond had, with some parallels to today. And if I haven't gone too much over time, I'll wrap up there. But so the first thing I want to say about the context is that in Fleming's own words, James Bond was not a gourmet. It's quite important we get this straight off the bat. The quote, I'll just read a very quick quote. In England, he lived on grilled soles, oeufs cocottes, and cold roast beef with potato salad. But when traveling abroad, generally by himself, meals were a welcome break in the day, something to look forward to break the tension of fast driving with its risks taken or avoided. That's from Her Majesty's Secret Service. And he was also looked after by his housekeeper called May in his Chelsea flat just off the King's Road. So when he was abroad and doing his thing, he was very happy to splash on the company card, especially as he probably didn't know whether that meal would be his last. So absolutely, he would go for the fine dining whenever he could. Not always. In Live and Let Die, he basically lives off chicken sandwiches and horrible chicken dinners and traveling across Florida with Felix Leiter trying to apprehend Mr. Big. But where he could, he would obviously go for the fine dining life. But at home, he was very much, in Fleming's own words, he was not a gourmet.
Richard, can I just ask?
Yeah, of course.
You mentioned one of his favourite meals there is oeufs cocotte.
Oeufs cocotte, yeah, so sorry.
Exactly what is that, please?
Okay, so oeufs are just eggs in French, and cocotte means they're usually served in, they're usually poached, served in a ramekin with creme fraiche and chopped up herbs, usually chives. Usually
sounds
poached,
amazing. It sounds like potential lockdown dinner tonight.
If you have a microwave as well, it's incredibly easy. Just pop a couple of those in a ramekin with some creme fraiche and those you're basically done in 20 seconds. Probably not the most pièce de résistance, but it certainly will do pretty quickly.
Thank you.
But on to his some of the things that I've pulled out, and there are just too many to mention, so I'm never going to cover all of them. But caviar on toast makes a regular appearance, and usually as a starter, a canapé or somewhere elaborate. Broiled lobster is another dish that makes a few mentions, and it's never really sort of too fancy, which is quite nice. I quite like that. It was usually just glazed in something like hot butter, and that reminds me of. It takes me to where I think I've had the best crustacean I've ever had, which turns out to be a king crab. There's a restaurant in Copenhagen called Noma by a chap called René Redzepi, which won the best restaurant in the world for 5 years, according to the Pellegrino top 50, which I have my own views on in terms of that guy. That's one of the things I talk to with people at the table if they wish. But that guide put this restaurant at the top. It's a 2 Michelin star restaurant, went through the roof. And the king crab dish they served there when I finally got into this restaurant was just served with a glaze of egg yolk. It was absolutely masterful. It's the quality of the king crab, the inherent sweetness is what I always look for in either langoustine or lobster or anything. And it just doesn't need to be tampered with too much. You put it in a broth and it's over. It's just killed the lobster. Anyway, that makes a regular appearance. Smoked salmon. Now I've got to mention this because Bond absolutely adored salmon. In fact, to the point in Moonraker, he says, I've got a mania for really good smoked salmon. Scottish salmon has the glutinous mouthfeel that is lacking in Scandinavian salmon, according to Fleming. And in the very last short story of the last book, Octopus in the Living Daylights is the last novel, which is actually 4 short stories, as Claude just mentioned. And he pictures himself in the Edwardian room of the Plaza in New York, where he longs for Scotch salmon and quotes, not that thickly cut, dry and tasteless Canadian stuff. But the quote continues, but one could never tell with American food. As long as they got their steaks and seafood right, the rest could all go to hell. And he also mentions in Diamonds Are Forever that Nova Scotia salmon is a poor substitute for Scottish salmon. So apologies if there's anyone from Canada watching it, but I'm afraid Bond's words, not mine. I think it's probably fair to say he might have been a bit biased to Scottish produce in general, being a Scot himself. His father was Scottish, his mother was Swiss. He grew up in Skyford, just outside of Glencoe, which is a beautiful place. But I've been to the spot where he gets out of the car with Judi Dench in Casino, I beg your pardon, in Skyfall. So I should have had that as the backdrop, but that's a wonderful play. But he was a Scot, and he probably liked Scottish salmon for that, if we could say for that reason. I have my own views on that if you want to ask later. Anyway, so salmon is one of the loves, as is classic sauces. He absolutely adores the classic French sauces, in particular sauce béarnaise. And I was over the moon when I read this, frankly, because sauce béarnaise is not only one of my favourite sauces, but one of my favourite things in the world. And it's he has sauce béarnaise with his beef tenderloin in Casino Royale. He has it over with his lamb and Moonraker with M at the fictitious club of M called Blades. It's a fascinating duel they both have with Hugo Drax. And he also has it in Diamonds Are Forever when Tiffany Case puts it. In fact, chapter 22 of Diamonds Are Forever is called Love and Sauce Béarnaise, where he actually tells Tiffany he could actually almost marry anyone who could make him a good sauce béarnaise. So she ends up making him a sauce béarnaise herself, rather like Solitaire tries to make him a cocktail at the end of Live and Let Die. But Tiffany Case makes the béarnaise on these little beef toast canapés. And he has mousseline sauce with his turbot. Mousseline, by the way, sorry, is hollandaise with whipped cream. And that's another variant of the mother sauce of hollandaise and all of its derivative daughter sauces. And he has mousseline again with his eggs Benedict in The Man with the Golden Gun. So it's at Scaramanga's place, which brings me on to his absolute favourite dish of all time. I'm not sure whether you may be aware, but as I mentioned, he's not a gourmet. His absolute favourite dish, and if you go through all the books, you will probably end up getting bored of reading it so many times, actually turns out to be scrambled eggs and bacon. If you are what you eat, Bond can be probably justifiably described as a 6-foot egg wrapped in bacon. There's 22 mentions of this meal in the first 2 novels. And breakfast is his favourite meal, bar none. He'll have scrambled eggs and bacon day or night, and if night, usually with champagne, which he does in Doctor No. But he also has it usually washed down with marmalade, to my horror, and something I don't normally go for, but on hot buttered toast with washed down with coffee. And his favourite bacon is hickory bacon, in case you were wondering, and that's pointed out in Thunderball. And the last, Claude mentioned the last books of Octopussy. The very last one is called 007 in New York, which, as I mentioned, he reflects on salmon, but he also dreams of scrambled egg being made with hot butter, whisked in the American way, not the French with the spatula, which causes a more sort of lumpy, larger lumps texture, whereas you whisk it, you get a more sort of porridge texture. On hot buttered toast, served in copper little dishes with chopped up chive and with low music and pink champagne, brackets Tassinger. And that is his dream food situation. So
that's amazing, Richard. I'm sure you're going to move on to the drinks as well in a moment. We have about 5-6 minutes, give or take.
Okay.
And of course, we'd love to all know James Bond's ultimate favourite drink. Is it the martini, shaken or not stirred?
Yes, indeed. And that does lead me very well talking about the champagne to the drinks. I'll cut this bit a lot shorter, but it's actually a bit of the vodka martini turns into a bit of a cliche. In the books, he does have vodka martinis, but he probably has as much champagne as anything. But in fact, the only time he mentions specifically, as far as I can see, the ingredients of his martini is a dry martini in Casino Royale, where he asks the waiter for his dry martini. Waiter comes over and he asks for it, oui, monsieur. And he says, just a minute. 3 parts Gordon's, 1 part vodka, half a part Quina Lillet, vermouth, shaken over ice to be ice cold, and served with a large, thin lemon peel, which, in all credit to the 2006 film with Daniel Craig, his first in Casino Royale, is pretty much said word for word as he plays Le Chiffre at poker, which is, by the way, which is Baccarat in the actual book. But that's the only one he specifies in terms of a martini, but he does end up drinking lots of vodka martinis. If you think about it, if everyone knows the world's greatest spy in existence has a vodka martini shaken stir, it sort of rather brings into question how good a spy one can be. But so that does sort of morph into the films. But in terms of other cocktails, Americano, bitter Americano, ingredients another time perhaps. Champagne, Tassinger is his favourite. M notices this as in Blades.
What about Dom Perignon?
Dom Perignon, yeah, he actually in Moonraker is suggested by the sommelier to have Dom Perignon 46, which Bond accepts, and he doesn't go for his Tétranger. So that's actually one example where he does. But all the other champagnes, Krug, Bollinger, Pol Roger, and he almost overdoses on whiskey in some of the earlier Bond books. Fraser
just asked a question about bourbon.
Oh, bourbon, yeah. I mean, he has several different kinds, but he almost has, I think he has a quarter of a pint of bourbon in his meal in Tampa in Florida in Live and Let Die, and a pint of bourbon in Japan, who obviously they like sake, and Japanese are known for their whiskies as well. I mean, there is no doubt that where the films do get it right is that this guy likes a drink or two, here, there, and everywhere. But the martinis, a quick finish on that one. Wines as well is another huge subject, Mouton Rothschild. But in terms of martinis, yeah, he actually preferred Russian vodka compared to Polish vodka, and he makes that very clear in Dr. No. I've probably only got a minute or so left, so I suppose one nice little throwaway is when he has his meal with Vesper Lind at the Hotel Splendide in Royal Les Eaux, a fictitious town in North France, Casino Royale. And Vesper Lind has veal kidneys, so she has rognon de veau. Bond has coeur d'artichoke and tenderloin, so that's Jerusalem artichoke hearts. Now, when Bond gives his actual heart to Vesper by telling her that he loves her, she gives him a little jab in the kidneys, which is a nice little foreshadowing from the meal. And the books are littered with these little references. You can translate people's names, and they turn out to be something quite pertinent to the book or the surroundings or what was going on in the Cold War era at that time. And there's just too many to mention. But as I'm probably approaching the end, I'll sort of pull stumps there. But I'll leave you with one little bit. As I read for the first time recently on Her Majesty's Secret Service, all of the missions have a code name, and the code name for the operation. And the code name for the operation on Her Majesty's Secret Service is entitled Operation Corona, which is obviously fairly pertinent. And based on that note, when this is all over and the restaurants do start opening up, there's lots of different views on how it's going to look in the future and what that's going to be like. But I think it's probably fair to say that I'm quite looking forward to. I think Linda and I are looking forward to getting some form of event, a Bond-themed event, really. And what better way to celebrate the new Bond film in November? And I can't think of any better way to polish off a day or two of doing that for whoever may be interested than concocting a menu, which I'm currently doing, which are taken directly from the Fleming books, and with the drinks that Bond has. I think that might be quite a nice thing, which is another thing I'm very much looking forward to doing. But I'm probably in danger of going over. But
thank you.
That's
no,
thanks for listening.
That's amazing. Thank you. I'm sure we all enjoyed those insights so much. And actually, what you just said about experiences, and when we do get back to some kind of normality, and all the beautiful places that we love open their doors again. And we can enjoy these experiences in person. Something very interesting, a quote that I heard over the weekend from the CEO of Forbes Travel, when asked about how we're going to conduct ourselves in the new world that we're entering. And something that he said about luxury was that luxury is going to become experiential. And that's going to be a key thing for everyone. It's going to be all about those experiences. And I think it's something that you can apply in any field of business and life. You know, to offer people those amazing, unique experiences will really be the way forward. That's going to be the kind of new luxury model in the new world. But in the meantime, please pop through any final questions that anyone may have to our three amazing speakers. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's been really, really wonderful, and we definitely intend to run a few more of these webinars. Our next is going to be in about 3 weeks' time, and the theme will be heritage. And I already have an amazing historian who's going to be taking part and speaking about the crown jewels. So that, of course, is a subject very close to our hearts at Beyond Curated. And we hope that we can just keep inspiring you, bringing some smiles, brighten your day, and keep that positive energy going. So wishing you all very well and stay safe. And thank you so much for tuning in. Feel free again to pop some questions in and share your details with other people in the chat if you like. We'd like this to be a networking forum as well. So if you want to pop your ULRs, your website addresses, your personal details, go ahead and you can share them with each other. But once again, thank you so much. And I'm going to leave you with a little bit of Bond music. Thank you so much to our speakers, Richard, Claude, James. James and Claude, are you there?
One parting thought, whilst we are in lockdown. Fleming wrote a rather wonderful travelogue called Thrilling Cities, in which he visited Vienna, New York, all sorts of cities around the world. And I think it was a sort of research trip. It shows how well researched his books were. I think a lot of the food, for example, that Richard mentioned, certainly the art he knew he would have encountered on these trips. And whilst we can't travel for real, if in the meantime you want to dip into that, it's quite a good read, albeit a little bit dated. It's from the 1960s, I think, but a really good read.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for that tip. If anybody would like to get in touch with me directly, my email is linda.hugo@beyondcurated.com. I'm more than happy to answer any further questions, and also feel free to check out our website, beyondcurated.com. Amazing. Thank you so much again, everyone, for joining. I'll just see if there are any final questions in the chat. Mostly everyone's just saying thank you and that they really enjoyed it. So that's brilliant. Thanks a lot. Everyone stay safe. Have a great day. And we'll leave you with some Bond music to finish this amazing session. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye.